What the flick, everybody? Welcome, Ben, Grace, and Sam, the finale of The People versus O.J. It turns out he was acquitted.
What?
I know. They had all that evidence, but he got off.
Very shocked.
Because I knew he was in jail now, and I figured it was for that.
Wow.
And an hour and a half long. I loved it. I was like, yes, it's an hour and a half.
I liked the longer episode. It kind of made me wish that we had longer episodes and other, like the glove episode could have been longer for me.
In the end, the show was a little cartoonish at the beginning that I never objected to. I thought that was good because the case had a cartoonish quality to it. And then I thought they nicely juxtaposed the cartoonish quality of the case with the reality of what the victims' families had to go through, like that this case became a TV show. And it was the murder of these two people and the family, specifically the Goldmans, because they became the symbol of the victims' families and the emotion that Fred and his daughter had, that Kim Goldman had just day after day after day after day in court.
8 months.
So you watch the show and there's this instant sort of, you have these competing emotions. Oh my God, this is so good. Oh, right. Right, I ache for them that they have to go through this again.
It's true. That's such a good point.
Yeah.
You're right. I think that's where the line got blurred between, oh my God, I'm watching this juicy soap opera, and then the reality that, wow, this isn't just a circus of a TV show. This is a double murder homicide trial. And here are the victims' families watching all of this play out every single day of their life for 8 months. And then, of course, ongoing, too, with the civil lawsuit and all of that as well.
And that Ron Goldman wasn't like this afterthought death. And you see what his family went through then and what they're unquestionably still going through now, which was that OJ beat Nicole and so it's about spousal abuse and some people say, why did Nicole leave, and not understanding why that happens the way it does. But it was never at any point about Ron.
Yeah.
Ever at any point.
And I really liked how they made his family so prominent in the series throughout. They gave them really good scenes. They gave them an arc. By the end of, I think in the finale, you felt very sympathetic to this family that you got to know, and I especially think the similarities in casting with Ron Goldman's dad is just it's a mirror. It's just like looking right at it.
And Darden, that scene where Darden just sort of collapses into Fred Goldman's arms. It was anyway. So
and that happened too.
Yeah.
Well, all of this to me, I was around, I was alive, but I don't really remember it at all. So
you were in your mommy's tummy.
I was just but a babe. So it's been really fun for me. After I watched the finale, I looked up all of the scenes just to see what really happened.
Isn't that fun?
It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I will say
I
that
was a working professional at the time. Yeah, I had a job, was going to work, getting the money, I had my own apartment. Yeah.
Working on my toys. No, what I really was interesting for me was I've developed a very serious crush on Sarah Paulson's portrayal of Marcia Clark. Yeah. Very serious. I did get all of Marcia Clark's mystery novels.
Did you? Oh, nice.
Following the series, but I was saying this to a friend of mine, and he was like, you wouldn't feel this way about the real Marcia Clark. I was like, no, what do you mean? He's like, watch her closing arguments after you watch the closing arguments that Sarah Paulson delivered. And it's true. Sarah Paulson really delivered that closing argument. You hear it and you get behind her and you see how did they not convict this guy? And then I felt Marcia Clark's real arguments were not as not as good.
There's no question this, but keep in mind these were written and Sarah Paulson talked for 2 minutes.
Yes.
Marcia Clark Marcia Clark did an hour.
After 8 months too, and I watched a special. Go ahead, sorry.
No, but so because when you go back and watch Johnny Cochran too. Also, again, a lot of. Did you when you were early on and you're
What's happening?
Right, and you're like no, you're like this, you're always on,
Yeah.
but they're lawyers. They plow through. It's plotting, so it doesn't. So I hear you.
Yeah.
But TV always makes lawyers seem like every single moment they either crush it or it's a huge failure.
And to provide some insight with Marcia Clark too, there was a really great special, and I've talked about it a couple of times on the show. It was on, I think it was on NBC, or it was a Dateline special where Marcia Clark said by the time that she was giving her closing argument, she had realized that he was going to get away with murder because she would. I think when she had that clarification in her mind when she talked about the blood analysis to them and she saw that all of them were just like not impressed by the blood analysis, and then she saw how they reacted with the glove before Johnny Cochran's famous catchphrase, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit, which we saw Johnny Cochran on his desk coming up with it, which I thought was brilliant.
He didn't
actually come up with it.
Oh, who did?
Gerald Ullman.
Yeah.
Oh my God! But so that was one of the things that didn't check out in the series because they made it look like that he came up with it.
No, I mean, the fact is, a member of the defense team came up with it. They were all working on it. It's just that scene where Ullman wasn't even a character in the show. And Cochran admitted that it was Ullman later.
Yeah.
But anyway, it didn't. It's one of those things you change that doesn't really matter, but it is worth mentioning that he didn't.
And Johnny Cochran's, to ask you, because did you watch both of the real closing arguments? Because
a lot of them.
Oh, so tell me, what was the difference between? Because the Johnny Cochran that we saw last night or 2 nights ago in the finale was very passionate and convincing, and I was like, oh wow, he's actually making this about a social responsibility to the jurors too. So then they're thinking, not only am I going to provide a verdict for a double homicide, but also the responsibility of all the racial injustices, and can I end police corruption? Like he applied that in his closing argument, at least in the series. Did that happen in the trial?
I think to an extent, but it's just like you were saying, it's a little plotting. It's just, and this is, I know that it's television, there's music, it's, these beautiful actors, I totally understand that, but it really is a little bit lackluster when you're watching and you're like, oh, well, that's just a sad story.
I remember watching that case, and every day when I'd watch thinking, I thought these lawyers would be better. All of them, every single one of them. I thought they always, but I think the truth is, and I covered courts for about 3 years when I was a TV reporter in Charleston, and they're all like, I had one great moment, it's worth telling because we're doing a court story. So I covered a double murder committed by a guy named James Reed. He's been executed. And I got to know him fairly well. I did a bunch of interviews with him in prison.
Whoa.
And I got to know the family of he killed his estranged wife's parents. Right, he went to see her, she wasn't there, and he killed them. And he defended himself. James Reed was, crazy in some way, in many ways. But he defended himself, which is a good sign that you're not thinking straight. And at one point, it was like the best dramatic moment ever in court. And it was clear he was going to get convicted. He's defending himself, and he did it. And the family was, same thing. Like I talk about it flippantly, and then I remember the family, the surviving kids, they were grown-ups, but they loved their parents, and it was just, it was horrible. But at one point, Reed wore glasses, right? And this witness testified that he saw Reed right outside the house at the time in a car. And so then Reed goes, let me ask you, was the person you saw, and he like touches his glasses, was the person you saw wearing glasses? And the guy goes, no, James, you didn't have your glasses on.
That's amazing. He thought he had like
the TV. He had a TV
my God,
moment.
It's so good.
No, James, you weren't
wearing glasses at that moment. Sorry. Yeah. He's like, oh, that's great.
I have nothing further. It was.
But it is interesting to see these TV moments that are so infamous now. Think of the glove. When Furman pled the Fifth. And
we talked about that.
And they're so dramatic, and it's so you just feel that tension when you're watching the show, and then rewatching it as it happened on TV at the time. I still think it holds this really these powerful moments, but it's just amazing to see it actually scripted. I think when it's scripted, it just takes it to a new level, which makes it. I feel weird to say this, fun.
Yeah, I said it earlier, and it is weird to say that.
No, it is. I mean, it was they created a fun show out of something that is, but also, again, I think an important show that for Americans, especially of your all's generation, sort of to see this moment when that racial divide that we now talk so openly about regarding police sort of was pushed upon white America, right? And I didn't get it at the time, too. I mean, I couldn't believe that it was an acquittal. I got, by the time we were close to the end, just by nature of the fact that it was like, this case took 8 months. You're telling me after 8 months and exhausting testimony and a billion breaks, oh, we're going to take a break. We're off. That that you're not going to get, I thought, at least a hung jury, that some jurors are going to be like, yeah, the doubt is reasonable.
In 4 hours,
and
that's so disturbing to me, that 8 hours or 8 months of a trial, and then you're supposed to review all of the different
As
evidence.
they kept saying, they talked about the case less than everybody else in America.
Yeah, 4 hours.
Right,
It's unbelievable.
Because for them, it was clear.
Yeah,
Like, it was clear.
exactly.
And so, like, you have to respect that, man, if you'd been on that jury and had only seen what was in that jury, you'd be like, okay, I don't know. And also what this seemed to leave out, and as I recall, Toobin's book touched on it a lot, the prosecution didn't get the timeline right. They made a timeline that was super, super tight. That was pretty easy to think, well,
to poke some holes in
the timeline, and then their unwillingness to call witnesses who had sold their stories. Again, a different era. Marcia Clark thinking if you'd sold your story to the National Enquirer, you're useless as a witness. Now, we could probably explain that away. Like, yeah, you'd take the lumps of saying, yeah, I sold my story. I sold a true story.
Right,
You know,
exactly. I wanted to make some money.
But back then, all of this reality,
it was taboo.
It was taboo, and it is no longer taboo. Those witnesses would get called now.
I think too the show, and we talked about this throughout reviewing the show, and we saw it again in the finale last night. They did such a great job of showing the racial tension.
Yeah.
So when we saw the verdict take place, we saw the racial divide.
Yeah, and they included actual footage from when the verdict was announced, which I thought was really powerful, just to show. The whole thing. It's unbelievable. It's one of those things where you can't write this stuff, but it really happened. You can write this stuff, and just having that correlation or showing, this is what really happened. Like, this is how it really affected people was just an amazing moment. And I think the show ended on such a good note. I selfishly wanted the writers to maybe show us what they think really happened. There's always kind of that temptation, like, okay, but what do you really think happened? Like, show us something bloody, which again, that's my problem.
I got you.
I'm messed
Well,
up.
there's a new show coming out. Did you hear, on Discovery ID? I think it's on Discovery ID, and it's narrated by Martin Sheen, and it's getting a lot of pushback, especially from Marcia Clark. It's going to be a series that, based on a book that was written by a private investigator, proving that O.J. Simpson didn't do it, but his son did. Not the son.
Oh, I've heard
the
about
older
that.
son
The
that was
older
24
son,
at the time. So there's a series that's going to come out that's going to maybe like somehow satisfy your yearning for more.
My yearning for blood. Good.
Yeah, it didn't.
Which is true. Sorry, Grace.
It's true.
There was a couple things I just want to mention. Cenk, I think, talked about it in a Young Turks segment, but Cenk and I were talking about it over the weekend. So Mark Furman, his story that he told on those tapes, which the show did pretty accurately, odds are he made a lot of that up. Because he was
they
talking,
investigated
he was
it.
talking
You know
to a
that, right?
screenwriter. Yeah. So, but that said, he still talked that way.
He's still a racist piece of shit.
That is unquestionably true. And the #1 cable news network in the country thinks it's okay to put him on television.
Fox News. So frustrating.
Like, I mean, this world is littered with conservative retired police detectives who aren't horrible racists. Hire one of them,
right?
Yeah,
and make
to
him
be your cop
to be your cop expert. But they thought so. We shouldn't act like they didn't hire him. They didn't hire him in spite of those comments. They hired him because of those comments. So so when you talk about how we got to Donald Trump today and Fox's sort of celebration of him for the last 10 years, right? And through the Obama presidency, last 8 years, and the birther stuff. Like, we created this guy, right? And we sort of, and part of it, a nice piece of evidence of that is their decision to be like, hey, that cop who used the N-word all the time, let's hire him.
Great.
Especially during the Trayvon Martin trial. They had him commenting, of course, in favor of George Zimmerman on Fox News. It was
the guy who owns the
horrific.
Nazi memorabilia and uses the N-word constantly. Let's hire him. He'll be great. So that's why they hired him. That's why they hired him, and that's why when the Republicans now are like, how do we end up with Donald Trump? It's because you created this environment. You allowed it. You built it. You nursed it. You
preach.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to throw that in because it's worth mentioning. I have one other thing I wanted to.
The ending was really good though too, showing just the difference in perception of of the reality, meaning how people were picketing and protesting in front of his home. People didn't show up to his party from his club.
And he's clueless.
He's clueless.
Yeah.
He thought he would come home and people would celebrate
celebration.
him, and in reality, he couldn't get into the Riviera, which I believe was true.
Oh, yeah.
I believe
Yeah,
that was
totally,
true.
yeah.
And
I found him when I found him I was a reporter in Charleston, and I got sent. Our news director sent me to Los Angeles to find O.J. Simpson, and get a crew, get a camera.
where'd you go?
So I went first to the
golf
public
course?
course at what's the one called nearby in West LA? The one at on Motor.
Yes.
So I went there
Are you
first.
a golfer?
No, I drove past it. It's on the way to the West LA Animal Shelter.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So
Love you for that.
So he's not there. He'd been there before. Then I went to, and the guy there tells me that he sometimes plays at a course in the Valley. And I went to some course in the Valley, and I say I find the starter, and I'm like, hey, this is stupid. I'm a reporter in Charleston. I'm just trying to track down O.J. Simpson. I make all these rules. I go, I want to ask him about what is the starter care? I go, I want to ask him about the murders. I just want to ask him what his life is like now. That's really what was interesting to us. And the guy, I go, does he play here? And the guy goes, I think he's probably on 7 now. The second place I went to.
No way.
And so I go to the 9th hole, and I waited.
Did you
for him
see
to make
him?
the turn.
Did you talk to him?
I did. I
What?
interviewed him.
What?
We got a 3-part series.
Tell me.
And so it was it was the second interview he'd ever done.
Was he open to you?
Totally. And the fact is, I start by going, I don't want to ask you about June 12th. I could have asked him about June 12th. I'm an idiot. I was a terrified reporter. I was 27. His hands were gigantic, the biggest hands I've ever. They engulfed my hands. And he was incredibly charming right away. And so you're like, and instantly you got, this is what, the cops framed this guy. Inconceivable, right? I mean, inconceivable.
Right.
They loved him.
Who got him off all those times that he all those domestic violence charges.
Yeah.
But then they decided to
They're
frame
like,
him.
no.
Yeah.
In that second. So, but you forget, and then I'd get roped in. I'm like, oh, Charlie, I'm laughing. I'm like, oh, right. And this was after the civil verdict. This was after.
Right.
This was right after the civil verdict, because then he was more likely to talk, and we did, and we talked for 17 minutes, and he made a bunch of jokes, and his buddies were going to go, and he sort of denied. He was acknowledging that his life was harder than he thought, meaning people had shunned him, but he acted like he didn't care, but it seemed he did. And then, from a reporting point of view, one of my great moments was being able to call back in Charleston and be like, they're like, so what happened today? I'm like, well, I went to this place, and I talked to O.J. Simpson for about 20 minutes.
Wow.
And they were like, what? So, but it was nuts. Like, one, what was I doing there? And 2, I blew it. Like, in
But
hindsight.
maybe he wouldn't have talked to you. Maybe he would have been like, buzz off.
Maybe would have been worth it.
I'm trying to tee you off, buddy.
The right thing to do would have been to ask him.
right.
But I mean, that said, many people have asked him tough questions. He doesn't. It's not like he was going to admit it, and he didn't.
I wanted to get both of yours opinion on Robert Kardashian as sort of like the Greek chorus in this final episode. Pretty much just as the spectator, and I think they use the character of Robert Kardashian since he's dead, so they can kind of use him as a vessel a little bit more than other characters for the audience's reaction to the show.
Right.
And did you think that was effective?
I think it was very effective.
Very.
Yeah,
Throwing up after the verdict.
Yeah, just his
horrified
eyes.
face,
Yeah,
his
right.
eyes
Like
told it all.
And he's in that. There's the great photo of OJ sort of smiling when he hears not guilty, of Cochran sort of grabbing OJ and pumping his fist, and Robert Kardashian is like,
I just helped him get away with murder.
right.
Of my
We
friend,
think
nonetheless.
we're projecting. He may have thought, oh, this is finally over.
Well,
thank
no,
God.
he did admit in a number of different interviews that he was
Had doubts.
conflicted in doubts,
Right,
and
but
he stopped talking to OJ after the fact.
He did. The show makes it seem like he's certain, and maybe he was. The fact is, they stopped talking. Saying you have doubts and stopping talking seems a pretty clear indication that you think he did it. But I thought it was effective, and I thought what was also effective is the way you grew into these outlandish sort of caricatures of Schwimmer as Kardashian and Shapiro and Travolta as Shapiro. In the beginning, you're like,
Right.
Travolta. But by the end,
I loved it.
I'm more comfortable. You weren't less.
I really did not like John Travolta's
I got into it, like we
depiction
talked
of
about it like
Robert.
3 episodes ago. I all of a sudden
You
was
didn't
like
like it?
sold.
No, I thought it was way over. I mean, because Robert Shapiro
I
is such a
loved it.
good character. They could have done it. They just could have, toned it down. John Travolta.
No thanks.
Could have toned it down.
Nope.
He's also a huge, so they got a huge man in John Travolta. His face is just massive for what's your business, dude? Well, I don't know why it is so massive now, but it was like, his face is massive, and then Cuba Gooding Jr. is tiny. And like
And since OJ was so, as I just said, OJ was
huge,
such an
this massive man, and then you have the small kind of, I still think of him as like radio.
That said,
that's how I think of Cuba Gooding Jr.
But Not Jerry Maguire? Radio?
Yeah.
Nope, radio. Was a big hit in Belgium where I grew up. Belgians loved radio.
So we got to go, but a couple things. I by the end, I really loved Cuba Gooding Jr.'s performance.
I did
Yes,
too
his
at the
performance,
end.
yeah.
His voice, he started to
And
nail like OJ.
just the way his eyes look, like, working through that party and being like, this isn't supposed to be, this is not how it's supposed to
And
have
where are
gone.
all my friends?
Where's John? Where's the
Yeah.
guys I play poker with? Where are
Yep.
the guys?
Yeah.
There's strangers. So
He did a
there's
good job in
celebrity
the end.
hangers on, yeah. And I mean, I think that's the toughest role by far, because he's the one you can't make look like him really either. Whereas the other people you could, the makeup and so.
Yeah.
But Sterling Brown as Darden,
Amazing.
and
Incredible.
Courtney B. Vance as Johnny Cochran,
Sarah Paulson.
and obviously
Sarah
Paulson's a given. But I think there are a lot. I mean, who played Gil Garcetti? Bruce.
Oh, he nailed it too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. Name's escaping me.
By the end, so many people like I could there, and I think Schwimmer in the end.
I
like,
agree.
Like that those are all Emmy-worthy performances in the end.
They did a great cast.
They did.
did.
Great cast, great show. I think this is a start to, an American crime series that is going to be really fun to watch.
What will be next?
Katrina. I think they're doing something on Katrina.
Really?
That's what I've read about. Yeah.
Oh wow, that would be
And then
fascinating.
last thing we got to go. But
Okay.
who was the what was that? What's that Donald Glover show that we're getting? Bruce Greenwood, by the way.
Okay.
It's Gil Garcetti. That Donald Glover show is like Atlanta, and they're watching it. It would appear.
Oh,
they're
that
watching.
that threw me off.
I know,
The commercial?
totally.
That was smart.
By the way, real quick, just so two white friends of mine in Charleston, when the verdict came down, just to give an indication that I experienced what I'm sure everybody else did too. Two reporters, a reporter and a producer, good people who were friends of mine, and they both, in their stunned moment about that, both used the N-word. Yeah, so like
Wow.
this verdict,
It brought up conversation.
man,
it
it was,
really did.
that was one of the worst days I've ever experienced. Just in terms of how I felt. Like, I mean, I had nothing to do with this, but I was like, Jesus, I learned some awful things about people, and
Right.
and we're.
It was an
I didn't even know-
emotional
yeah,
trial.
It was just
An
bad.
emotional trial.
It was bad. O.J. Simpson, as the show pointed out, likely out of prison in 2017. Likely out next
Likely,
year.
you think so?
Yeah, he served. There's 33 years. He'll have served 9. He's been paroled already for most of the charges. For what he did,
Right.
9 years, probably about right. I mean, he should be in prison for the rest of his life. But so there's a good bet, and that'll be interesting. Okay, guys, thanks for watching. This was fun, guys. Thank you.